Welcome back, everyone. Linda Joy Ben here on another exciting episode of Crossroads of podcast. And today I have a very special guest called Rael Bricker, and he has got an amazing story, amazing background from a very diverse background with business, but also training for triathlons and marathons, and just about had a heart attack. And so that changed everything that he was doing. But his other passion is business and helping other business owners. He's originally from South Africa, and I'll let Rael tell you his story on his transition from South Africa and then being here in Australia and everything that he's created over the years. So welcome, Rael. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to share the story because it's one of diversity and one of embracing diverse experiences to make me. I turned 60 this year, and to bring those things into those 60 years, I fulfilled what my late father used to say, and that was that he wanted to retire one day, and unfortunately he died too young. But he always said he wanted to retire one day with 40 years experience, not 1 year 40 times over. And I think that is the philosophy that I've embraced throughout my entire life, that every day and every year and every month has to be different.
Beautiful. So from your background, you started in finance and then moved into helping others build their business.
Yeah,
And
correct. I I started in finance in Australia in 2001. Um, I had a varied journey before that. Actually started an education business catering to the previously disenfranchised Black community in South Africa. We started in 1990 with 20 students, and by 1996, we reverse listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange with 6 campuses and 4,000 students. The majority of whom were from low socioeconomic background and who didn't have the vote until 1994 in South Africa. So very interesting times that we lived through. An amazing hunger for education, and it taught me a lot about people. It taught me a lot about, dealing with people. I was young, I wasn't 30 yet, had staff, and all the other challenges that went with running your own business. And so that was kind of that part of that experience that lends itself to what I do today on stage.
so going back to South Africa and setting up that business then, were you the first one to actually do that, or was there other people? Like, were you the pioneer to actually help educate
No,
others?
it's actually interesting. So my partner and I were 26-year-old MBA business school graduates. I had just got my second master's degree. My first was in engineering, and then I got an MBA. And we were so arrogant and so full of ourselves that we wanted to teach the world how to run their businesses. So what I do today, 30 odd years later, is exactly what I wanted to do then, except at that point, I'd never run a business. So I wasn't quite sure how I was going to help people run their businesses when I'd never run one myself. But that lack of knowledge didn't stop me. It was just bizarre, like how much the ego got involved. So we know, and we did, and today when I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, and they say, I'm on spreadsheet number 27, and I think I've got the right model for my business. My first answer is that's 26 spreadsheets too many. All right. You overthinking it. The back of my book the first book that I published in 2018 says on it that business is not complicated. Business is simple. Just dive in and adjust your course while you're moving. And that really embodies that philosophy. Embodies that philosophy of, my partner and I, if we had actually logically thought through the industry, we would never have gone into it. we
Why
there,
is that?
there
Because
were big players. We had no money. There were big established players already. Um, there were a whole lot of reasons, and we just went, yeah, why not? I
right,
mean, we started a consulting business, and 6 months later, we had no consulting work. And so an institute called Institute of Marketing Management said, you guys are so well qualified, why don't you teach our diploma? So in South Africa, you had what would in Australia be the equivalent of the TAFE system,
yeah,
but you didn't really have the TAFE level certificate fours that you do in Australia. So those were often run by private institutions like this Institute of Marketing Management that ran a 4-year certificate or 4-year diploma. Okay. Yeah, and we said, well, okay, it'll generate us some money. So we ran a few adverts in the local paper and got 20 students. And then we thought, okay, this has a few legs as a business. So the next year we actually found some classrooms and actually started as a real business. And we were cowboys. So we had to rethink everything we did. Nothing was standard. Like even to the extent of the advertising that we did was cowboy,
learning as you go.
it was, yeah, but we'd try it, and if it didn't work, we're not committed to anything. We weren't married to anything. I think that's the big
Yeah,
idea.
non-attachment to
And,
outcome.
and we were in the right place at the right time. 1990 was the year Nelson Mandela was released from jail. In fact, my connection with that is that my wife and I got married on the same day Mandela was released, on the 11th of February, 1990.
Wow.
So, in fact, at the same time, he walked out of jail at 4 p.m. And the joke I often tell on stage is that he walked out of jail and I walked into jail. But my wife has approved that joke, so that's fine. But that time, so we were in the right place at the right time, which led to our success, but also the ability for us to grab those opportunities. So, you can be in the right place at the right time and not grab the opportunities. So we did that. We grew and we rapidly grew our campuses, ended up at 6 campuses by 1996, and then decided there was a lot of political issues, a lot of violence, and we decided to find a way of exiting the business. We found a small listed shell, and we reversed our business into that, and then did 9 acquisitions for them. So that was my first real transition of my life, crossroad of
Yeah,
going from this entrepreneurial business to being managing director of a listed company, and going from this absolute hate of the corporation, because prior to 1990 I'd worked in a large corporation and I knew that I never wanted to do that the rest of my life. The going back to that, but also getting into corporate finance. So in terms of mergers, acquisitions, buying businesses, selling businesses, was a whole new learning experience. Didn't know anything about it, but learned on the go.
right.
Made 9 acquisitions in 18 months. Grew the share price from 90 cents to 14 Rand. So a massive growth in the share price. And then I left the company. I wanted to travel. I went and studied holistic healing and massage. I got a pilot's license. I traveled the world for 5.5 months with 2 small kids. Yeah, you don't get those opportunities in your late 30s.
Why did you go and study holistic health and massage after doing all this other corporate and business stuff? Why the complete change?
Just out of interest, it's about those experiences in life. I train a lot, and that was part of the major change in my life 11 years ago. But I've always been a sportsman. I was a state hockey player in my 20s, and then I damaged my kneecap and couldn't play for many years. But so I've always done sport. I've always done something. My body is consistently sore from all the amount of exercise I do. It's a good sore. It's not a bad sore. It's a good sore, like you've had a workout kind of sore. And so massage and holistic healing, one of the places I went to for massage was running a course on massage and holistic healing. And I went, sounds interesting, expands my knowledge base. And so I've never really practiced, but I'd expanded my knowledge base of what I knew.
Okay.
So, and then I got back into the corporate world. So I got not in the corporate world, but into mergers and acquisitions. So I joined a venture fund a
Yeah.
venture capital fund
Mm.
in South Africa. Now, that was just before the tech boom, so I was employed because of my software background to start looking at tech acquisitions for them and was there for 2 years, then moved to Australia and joined another venture fund in Australia. Like 4 weeks after I arrived here, I was offered a job as investment manager of an investment fund.
And why the move to Australia? What prompted that?
I had two small kids and I did not see a future for them. In fact, friends, who are in South Africa now, say they should have left 30 years ago or 25 years ago because the systems are in chaos. The education system, friends who've got money are sending their kids overseas to study because the South African education system is um, biased towards those of color, which is kind of weird to say because we lived through bias growing up. But it's just the systems are broken,
Yeah,
like most of Africa. And I kind of saw that coming and went, yeah, look, I want to raise my kids in a first world country, not a third world country.
yeah. And in a safe environment.
Yeah, well, that said, three of my kids are in three different cities while we record this podcast, and none of them are in Australia at the moment. So
Oh, wow. Wow. So they've definitely got their travel legs and
they
wings.
have their travel legs, yes. But yeah, so I came to Australia, joined this venture fund for 2 years, raised $22 million, listed that on the Australian Stock Exchange about 3 months before the tech crash. And then we listed it, and then they wanted me to move to Sydney, the rest of the management. And I went, no, I want to stay in Perth. I want to raise my kids in what was a relatively small town in those days. It's now 2.6 million people, but it was about 1 million people at that point.
Mhm.
And so I left them and went out on my own. And
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 that's when you
again,
started your
I
business.
started my finance business, but again, I didn't have 27 spreadsheets to work it out. I mean, when you go back logically to that point, 17% of mortgages in Australia were originated by finance brokers. The only state that was regulated at the time was Western Australia. So you could be driving a cab in Sydney today and become a finance broker tomorrow in 20 years, 22 years ago.
Wow.
I started helping companies raise capital, and then they said, "Oh, you did such a good job. Can you get us a loan?" And I went, "Okay, I'm sure I can. Let me find out how to do that." And so I did that.
It's a,
And
all right.
that was when my mortgage business started in late 2001.
Also by accident.
By accident.
Yeah.
Yeah, by accident. Absolutely by accident. And then they said, geez, you did such a good job with with our business loan. Can you work out our home loan for us? And I went, yeah, sure, I can do that. And $3.2 billion later, I still own that business. So it's been a fun ride. It was recognized as a fellow of the mortgage industry. There are only 51 fellows in Australia of the mortgage industry. Um, so I'm a veteran of the industry, but I still enjoy working in that industry. Like an opportunity came up a few years later. So that was 2001. 2004, a large property sales organization approached me to run a seminar for them on how to invest in property. And I said, sure. I'd never spoken about finance on stage. I'd spoken to lots of clients.
Yeah.
But I got on stage, and having been, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was South African Toastmasters champion in 1984. My late father took me to Toastmasters from the age of 15. So being on stage, being present on stage, being interactive with my audience was what I did. And
Just
I did this seminar for them, and they went, wow, no one's ever spoken about finance like that. And I went, don't know. I've been talking to my clients face to face about this for the last couple of years.
yeah.
It's fairly logical because I didn't use bank speak. I used English.
Yeah.
And they said, great, let's do that. And then I started traveling the world with them and specifically around Australia, doing lots and lots of these seminars. And when I do the maths, I've sold just over $1 billion of mortgages from stage. So people would be so excited by the way I explain things, they'd want to make appointments, come and see me. and get me to work out their mortgages, their strategies, retirement strategies, whatever. And so I still do that about 10 times a year now. It's not what I do, but I still own that business, but I still love the strategy part of it. I love the fact that every client is different. And that goes back to philosophy and life about every day being different. Every client is different. There are no two clients who are the same. And so I still see the clients, even at this stage. I have a great team who manages things for me, but I still see them. I work out the strategy and then I pass them on to my team to actually do the implementation. So
Wonderful.
going back 11 years,
Yeah.
I was on a high. I'd just been made a fellow of the industry. I was number 2 or 3 in Australia, according to the Mortgage Professional magazine. And I was, being invited left, right, and center to exclusive functions with, heads of major banks and all those sorts of things. And I had just finished a season of triathlons. And I was running on empty. I actually didn't know at the time, but I was running on empty. I was traveling every week, every second week over east, because from Perth to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, Darwin, Adelaide, where I had clients all over the country. I was doing seminars all over the country, and I started training for a marathon. And my mother-in-law had been through a lot of stuff with my father-in-law who had had cardiac issues. She said to me one day, "You're looking gray. Your skin is gray." And I went, "Okay. I haven't been training in the sun lately." And I just left it at that. And then my friend, my doctor, I went to him and he said, "There's something not right. You've got friends who are radiologists, go and have a CT scan of your heart." And I was 49. Yes, part of it was that I should have picked up the signs. All 3 of my 4 grandparents and both my parents had heart attacks. So there's a very strong
Yeah,
genetic link there.
that's right.
Anyway, but no markers were high. Cholesterol was low, sugar was low, all the traditional markers, the HbA1c, which is your long-term sugar level, all low. And anyway, I went for the CT scan. I jumped on a plane the same day I had the CT scan, flew off to Singapore with my wife. We were there with some friends for 4 days, eating and drinking and whatever.
Yeah.
And I got a call from my doctor to say, "Don't panic." Now, you don't want your doctor to phone you, and the first words that come out of his mouth are, "Do not panic." So anyway, he said, "Don't panic, go buy some aspirin. Take 200 milligrams aspirin a day. Don't go in for any long runs. And you're seeing a cardiologist next week."
And how were you feeling at the time? How was your energy level? How were you?
My energy was fine, except for the fact that when I went for a run, after about 10 or 12 kilometers, my neck would get sore, the back of my neck. And so I'd stop, and I'm a big unit. I'm what the Australians like to call me, built like a brick dunny. And, I would stop on the side of the road and stretch. And then my neck pain would go away and I'd go, "Sure," and I'd carry on. And then I'd go for a physio, and the physio would work on my neck and say, "Yeah, your neck's a bit looser now." So I was obviously a lot tense because I had tension in my shoulders, but I never really put it down to the fact that the circumflex artery behind, which goes on the back of your body, was 95% blocked. Okay, and that was what was causing the pain. When I was running at a certain level, my artery started causing pain. I was having angina.
Yep.
They also discovered in that CT that my LAD, which is known as the widowmaker, the most common cause of heart attacks, was 75% blocked. And so
So you're a walking time
I
bomb
was a
and
walking
didn't even
time bomb,
know
and
it.
I'm thankful for the fact that my doctor picked it up. I went to see the cardiologist. He went in and had a good look, and said, "Yeah, we'll do stents for you in 2 weeks' time. Walk around with nitroglycerin in your pocket for 2 weeks, just in case you feel pain again." So he had time. We didn't have any damage to repair. We just had to repair the blockages. And about a week after that, in fact, 8 days after my stents, I was invited to a meeting with the top banks in Australia in the Blue Mountains. And I was panicking because this had been a life-changing epiphany. And I got on the plane wearing, now I was on so much stuff to thin my blood. I would never have got a DVT ever in my life at that point because I was on stuff called Plavix, which you have after stents, which basically, if you cut yourself shaving, you may as well go to the doctor to have a suture because you just don't stop bleeding. It's like 6 hours, 7 hours before you stop bleeding.
Wow.
Your blood is that thin. It's like water. And anyway, I got on the plane even wearing skins, okay, because I was so paranoid now about getting a DVT, which is a
Yeah.
bit silly in retrospect. Went off to this meeting in the Blue Mountains and at Katoomba. And the
Mhm.
next morning, I did what I always did my whole life. I got up at 5:30 and I went to exercise.
Mhm.
But I was told I wasn't allowed to run for a couple of weeks, so I went for a walk. And I was walking up this hill from the Three Sisters back up to the hotel. And I had one of those light bulb moments where I said, you know, when I did this last year, this time, I had neck pain walking up this hill. And I went, I have no neck pain. Okay. And it was just that
Yeah.
moment where I understood where I was at and how that simple thing, but complex medical stuff that had put the two stents in had actually got rid of that completely. And 11 years later, I have to say, I'll talk about what happened in those 11 years, but my last visit to my cardiologist, he said, your tests are unremarkable. Come back and see me in 2 years. So I thought that was a fairly good that I've actually worked on myself in those 11 years. That not that I didn't beforehand, but I've worked on myself differently.
Emotionally and looking at
Interestingly, our friends just had a heart attack and two stents, and he struggles emotionally. In fact, two friends, they struggle emotionally with it because they had a heart attack, because they saw their own vulnerability.
right.
I actually didn't have that much of an emotional response because I hadn't had a heart attack, thankfully. All right. And I've seen the difference with people who've had a heart attack where they are much more paranoid about any feeling in their body. Because I never went through that sort of chest pain type stuff. But I'm much more aware of my body now than I ever was. I was abusing it at that point.
Yeah.
Before my stents, I was just,
Pushing yourself. So when
yeah.
you're walking up that hill in the Blue Mountains and you went, wow, I've got no pain, what were you thinking and feeling at the time?
I was just feeling how great it was. I mean, it was about -4 or something at the time, the temperature. So, but I remember just that feeling of why did I not react to that pain sooner?
And do you have an answer for that?
No, no idea. Because of my ego. It was an ego thing. In the first chapter of my book, the first book, I speak about the fact that in my years, I think I was 55 when I published it. I said in my 55 years, I've always mixed up confidence, overconfidence, and arrogance, and I'm hopefully learning the difference now. And that was exactly it. It was that overconfidence, nothing can touch me kind of approach. Whereas suddenly I realized, wow, there is a difference. And,
Yeah.
I can run it up this hill at 140 heart rate,
Hmm.
and not feel pain. And that was just amazing to me.
Interesting. And so when you had the surgery, what was the turning point at that point? Is it where, wow, I'm now more in tune with my body and I'm going to listen for the signs and take more notice of if there's aches and pains? Or how would you describe it in your words?
Well, I I became more aware of like the fact that I hadn't responded to my neck pain for a long time.
Mhm.
But I also became much more aware of the numbers surrounding like the medical and actually a lot of the stuff that comes out of your blood test and that kind of stuff. I became much more cognizant of what those numbers were, and I still monitor those numbers. But from a day-to-day lifestyle point of view, I went, wow, I've actually escaped a bullet. I've dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
And I've always been involved in community organizations. I've always been involved in helping people. But all those things sort of came to fruition. Like I went, yeah, this is where I should be. I knew where I should be. But part of that whole epiphany journey from that period in April to about a year later was I want to help people build successful businesses
And why is that? Why is that your passion now?
because I was successful. And I was successful despite the mistakes I made, but also I enjoy the mentoring aspect and not the telling aspect. So I cringe at some of my very early professional speaking in this space, which I'd have to call amateur, not professional at those days,
Yeah.
um, where I was telling,
Right.
where I was telling people what to do from stage. I wasn't living and reliving stories. I was just telling stories. And I was telling stories, but rushing through the story to try and make a point of you should do this in your business.
Oh,
Whereas now, even though I still do, I run strategy sessions for companies for 1 and 2 days. I'll run a strategy session. But even then, I'm now facilitating, I'm not telling. I'm telling them the technique, that this technique works in this way. Now, you people in the room fill in the blanks that makes us into a working document. Whereas probably 6 or 7 years or 8 years ago, I was telling people how to fill that in.
right. So now you're empowering them to actually use their own intelligence, their own brain, and fill it in. It's like you're,
Correct. Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly what I'm doing now. So
yeah.
I love so COVID changed things as well. So
In what way?
I was doing a lot of speaking, traveling the country again. I felt at times I was doing that same run around. Because I do a 5 or 6 city roadshow for a particular company or magazine, and you'd be doing 3 cities in a week, and then hop on a plane, go home for the weekend, and 3 cities the next week. So, a lot of fun, good money, got to meet cool people, interesting people, but at the end of the day, you have to go. Yeah, it was fun, right? And then 2019, I spoke in Kathmandu. I opened a conference in Nepal on a Saturday morning. I was the opening speaker, and I got to see the sunrise over Everest the next day. So it's about managing those experiences of life as well, getting to do those things. But then came COVID, March 2020.
Yeah.
Um, and because WA was in the semi-bubble where we didn't really have a lot of COVID in WA,
Mm,
and we were locked down from the rest of Australia, but we could freely move within our state except for 1 week.
right.
I started running small business academies for small and medium businesses because I built a little classroom in my office, and I was running small business academies over 14, 16 weeks where I was getting into, I wasn't earning as much money as being on a big stage, but I was getting so much satisfaction out of seeing people grow over those 3 to 4 months.
Nice.
Um,
That was another turning point in
that's a massive turning point
the
because I
build
suddenly
up
went,
your business
I,
model.
I can be a facilitator. I'd never really thought of myself as a facilitator beforehand, as a mentor. And suddenly that came to the fore. I could do that. Um, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching people grow and
Yeah.
them feeding back to me 6 months later when I had to catch up with them about how they'd implemented the systems and processes that we'd spoken about. So so for me that was kind of my next major shift in that I went from just being on the big stage
Mm.
just the keynotes and chasing keynotes all the time. I still love keynotes because it's a lot of fun to speak to 500 or 1,000 people in a room, and it does wonders for the adrenaline levels and the ego. But you don't know what impact you've made on people,
Yeah,
until you
that's
run into
right.
someone 6 months later. So, just a quick, last week, someone called me about a finance query, unrelated to anything else. Called me and he said still had my card from 5 years ago when he'd heard me do a talk on finance. And he knew that if anyone could solve his problem, I could solve it.
Right.
So,
So you
you
planted a
don't know
seed.
the impact you're having on people until you get that level of feedback. And that's why I enjoy the mixture of what I do now, which is a lot of workshops and facilitation, 3 to 4 hours, where at least you're starting to see some change in people, and up to 2 days for strategy. Our small steps program runs over a 3 month program, small steps to big changes. But I also do culture keynotes from stage. Okay. Um, you know, and useful change keynote from stage.
And do you still do all the travel that you were doing, or is that
I
slowed down
have.
a bit?
I This year, 2024, I haven't traveled a lot because I was organizing professional speakers convention in Perth. So from November to March, I didn't do any travel, but it starts up again now with 2 international speaking trips coming up in May and in June. So,
Right.
um, am I doing as much domestic travel? Not really, but I do a lot of domestic for business development now. So I will go over to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and spend 3, 4 days seeing potential customers. So,
The,
um,
the what came out of COVID is everyone adjusted to, instead of flying all over the country and physically doing business and doing their work, they learnt to do it online, and now that's more acceptable.
well, yeah, it's still not
It's not
as
the same.
impactful.
No.
Still not as impactful. I mean, I still prefer, even though I have this cool studio here where I can, add things on the screen and write pretty pictures on a glass wall, I still find there's no substitute for warm bodies in a room.
Absolutely. And to be able to hug somebody, that's my
Yeah, I mean, politically correctness, we won't go down there with the hugs, but the issue is um that having that the warm bodies in a room, having that reaction. And I built a hybrid classroom. So when I was running my small business academies, I had people from all over the world, plus people in the classroom interacting. And I have 3 cameras in the classroom and a whole lot of different microphone setups to handle that.
And are you still doing that today,
It's
Rael?
all set up. I'm actually launching the academy after my one international trip in May, because that's running some seminars for 300 entrepreneurs, a 1 day seminar twice. And part of the extension, the follow up to that will be to come to the academy. So I will launch it again after May. I haven't run one for about a year now.
Okay. And if people are interested in that academy, how do they find out more?
Just contact me, reach out. I'm on all the socials, but LinkedIn's my favorite.
Mhm.
um, or just railbricker.com. Reach out to me through the website. My mobile number, everything else is available on those media. And yeah, reach out, have a chat, book a time to have a conversation.
And what are three main, like out of all your experiences over the years, and because you've got so much resilience and it's like this unstoppable, fearless attitude of nothing was impossible, and
Yes.
so that's always what's driven you. So if someone's starting their business today, what's three major tips that you would tell them from your 40 years in
Okay,
business?
so I mean, by the way, and I flashed up on the screen earlier, but any of your listeners who want to can download a free copy of Dive In Lessons Learned Since Business School, which was published in 2018. it's in revision at the moment because lots has happened over the last 6 years. But the book really details my 10 top tips for business. And some of them are things like give up control to gain control. The typical entrepreneur starts a business, does everything themselves because they have to. They don't have money, they don't have whatever.
Yeah.
And as soon as you then start employing staff, the biggest problem I find with entrepreneurs is they employ staff, but they don't empower them. They're over their shoulder all the time. They're micromanaging them. But the entrepreneurs are generally good at the sales cycle because they are the most passionate about the product or the service. Go and do that. I always say do the $500 an hour income generation, and not the $10 an hour admin. And so that's probably one of the biggest tips that I would give young entrepreneurs is plan and design your business in such a way that you can hand over and empower people to do the admin for you while you do the sales generation and revenue generation. I was talking to a group of speakers the other day, and one of them said that his PA will set up all his appointments, but he has the final conversation with the clients to close the deal. Whereas one of the others said, oh, his PA is so good, she does all the sales for him. And it was an interesting discussion and argument. And it was about the one, absolutely insisting that the client wants to understand who they're buying. They're buying that person.
Yeah.
They're buying their heart, their soul, their body for that time. And you can't be sold by someone else necessarily. It was an interesting debate.
Yes, it would have been.
That's the first of the tips. The second one is draw your ethical boundaries. Draw your ethical boundaries of what you will and won't do, and stick to those. Because a lot of people just don't draw those up or don't actually even define them, and then they get posed with an ethical dilemma, and then they move the boundary, and they move the boundary, and they move the boundary, and then
They
on
lose.
what basis are they operating?
Yeah. Well, but based on their values and what's important to them, and why did they start the business in the first place?
Sure. And so I have, certain things, that certain holidays of the year, certain religious holidays, I will not work. It doesn't matter how much money you offer me, I will not work. And this year, I've ended up turning down 2 speaking engagements on those holidays. And that was worth $20,000 of money, and I'm just, and I'm going, no, I won't travel on those days. It's quite simple.
Yeah.
And so that's the one level. And the other level is, will I work for tobacco company today? I'm not particularly demeaning those who smoke on tobacco, but for me, it doesn't align with my values.
Yes.
And therefore, I probably would not accept a speaking engagement from a tobacco company. I will accept from alcohol companies, but not tobacco. Okay. Okay. But yeah, just, those are the sort of ethical boundaries that we draw up, and when, you've got sponsors of a conference and they want to, be the sponsor of your talk, the sponsor has to align with your core values.
Absolutely.
So that's a third, the second of them. And the third one is communication is king. I have so many entrepreneurs that I've counseled and mentored over the years, who one of them used to refer to his staff as Muppets.
Wow.
And the same reason he had a revolving door of staff.
Yeah.
Staff never stayed. My key team in finance have been with me from 12 to 17 years.
Wow.
And so they have a longevity because I communicate. We all overshare in this office, which is a separate conversation to have. But communication is the king. I recently worked with a company where the staff would send an email to the boss who wouldn't respond for 3 weeks.
Oh dear.
And not even walk past. Like, I will sometimes be busy and I'll walk past one myself and go, I got your email, I will get to it. I'm acknowledging that I've seen it and that I will get to responding to them. And I'll say, is it urgent?
Mhm.
right? Whereas this particular entrepreneur just had no respect for staff and wouldn't respond to their correspondence. Um,
Well, that creates another revolving door because if people,
and that organization has become a revolving door.
yeah,
And the revolving door doesn't seem to worry the leadership, and that's the bigger problem. But yeah, so there are a whole lot more tips in the book. So,
okay,
you can download. I think I saw you had downloaded a copy anyway, but there are a whole lot more tips in the book, and it tells the story of where those evolved from my very first when I told people what to do presentations. It was called Tips and Traps from the Trenches. Wasn't really much tips. It was more these are the things you should do. Um, but that was what evolved into that book.
awesome. And just again, where can people pick up a copy? Is it also on,
Yeah, railbricker.com/free download. Sorry, free book. Railbricker.com/free book.
and the hard copy, is that on Amazon?
Amazon and Booktopia and all the other moving parts that make up the printed book industry.
Beautiful, beautiful. Any final tips or anything that you would like to share before we finish up, Rael? Because this has been,
Every crossroad. So one of my speaking coaches, and even though I was in Toastmasters at the age at 15, I've been to a couple speaking coaches, and one of them, which is very relevant to your podcast, in a number of my keynotes, I talk about being at the crossroads of humanity and technology.
mm,
And he said to me, don't just talk about it. And for those, when you use this video, you'll see that I've stepped back in the video for a particular reason.
mm,
Because I stand on stage and I say to the audience, take your right hand and put it on your left shoulder, and take your left hand and put it on your right shoulder. And now you have to embrace the crossroads of humanity and technology. And that's quite an amazing, powerful thing when you get 500 people in a room embracing not only themselves, but the crossroads in their lives.
yes.
And that would be my final comment.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time and sharing today. I'm sure many people will download your book and also buy a hard copy because there's so many valuable tools and tips in that book. And I'd highly recommend it to, especially those who are looking to start businesses or on that entrepreneurial journey, because it's quite a fascinating ride and journey that we create for ourselves.
We
So,
do. And that's what it's about. It's about just embracing that change, embracing there's no such a thing as a problem. Everything is just a solution. It's what we call the solution focus. It is, we don't care how we got here. Think about your GPS. When
yeah,
you get in the car and you put Google Maps on, Google Maps is not your partner in life who says, where were you yesterday?
yeah,
Google Maps says, where do you want to go today? And let me find you the optimal route to get there.
exactly.
And that's how you've got to face every challenge in life and go, we don't care how we got here. Where do we want to be? Let's create a vision of our preferred future.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing, Rael. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really thank you for your time, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. So
Thank you, Linda. It's been a pleasure to be here.
thank you, Rael. Bye bye.